As a cricket journalist, I would travel sometimes up to 200 days a year. I loved watching cricket games. I loved going to new countries. It was an absolute dream. But there was one thing I hated more than anything else about it, and it was this little pin. The thing that I need to change my SIM card in every new country. The absolute worst thing about this pin and SIM cards is when I was traveling to the West Indies, of having to arrive in every new island or country and having to work out if I could still find this pin and then line up and get my SIM card in every single airport. Well, now we have the answer thanks to Saily. They can make it so you never have to worry about this nonsense ever again. They use an eSIM app that once you install once, it is easy, simple, and cheap. Oh, and it works in more than 160 countries. And you can throw these pins away forever because now you just need to download the Saily app before your trip. And if you do it with our code, Good Areas, you get an exclusive 15% discount on Saily eSIM data plans. So before your next holiday or work trip or anytime you have to travel to another country, download the Saily app and use the code Good Areas, or one word, at checkout, and you can travel like a pro with Saily.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the latest episode of the Footmarks podcast. I'm Behram, Qazi, who you can find at DefMango on Twitter. And with me is Jarrod, Kimber, who you can find literally everywhere. And Justin, Jarrod's book, The Art of Batting, has been officially published. It's in bookstores across the UK and available on Amazon. This happened on the 8th of May. And that is why the title of this episode of the Footmarks podcast is also Behind the Art of Batting, because it's a bit of a BTS. But Jarrod, before we get into everything else, how does it feel that the release date of your book has literally coincided or did coincide with an India-Pakistan war?
It wasn't ideal, was it?
Nope.
It was quite weird. There's so many little things that you have to do, interviews and PR things and extra articles and whatever. So it was always going to be a week where I wasn't going to be able to do as much on the channel. And then they shut down cricket anyway. So I suppose they kind of gave me a little bit more time. But yeah, no, it was absolutely random. I mean, the other random fact is that I released this book and Virat Kohli reads this book and instantly retires. Just looks at my book and is that as high as I could get in this list? This is disappointing. If I keep playing, he might move me lower. Rohit Sharma notices he's not in the list, Behram, and he retires. So, a lot of movements going along in some ways. Do I control all the world? I think yes.
Yeah. I mean, you clearly control geopolitics, even though now, luckily, we have a ceasefire and I'm here stress-free right in front of you. But then also, two of India's greats retire around the same time the book is released. There are no coincidences, folks. Okay. Let's just put it that way. But anyway, Jarrod, the book is available for purchase in stores across the UK and it's also available on Amazon. But where else can people buy your book from? Let us know.
So, depending on your market, you can go to the Bloomsbury site and just put in Art of Batting and it will come up. But there'll be a link in the show notes. There's a link on our Substack. You can even get a discount on that. It's available in Kindle and ebook in quite a few Amazons around the world. So that it's selling really well in India at the moment, even though there is no book. The book will come to Australia and India. I'm not exactly sure when it goes to Australia. It's supposed to already be in India, and we're not sure what the issue is. And Bloomsbury are off at the moment trying to work that out. But it's number one on the book charts in India in the cricket books without a print copy being available. So big thanks to everyone there. That's gone crazy. And I think it's number 3 in the UK behind Jimmy's book and Wisdom. So as the 2 biggest markets in cricket, I'm doing okay. It would just be better if we could actually get the book printed and sent out to people. But this is the first time I've ever had a book released in multiple places in the one time. And it doesn't seem like it's a very straightforward process, is what I would say, Behram. But in the future, it will be much better. But yeah, we're just waiting for the teething problems and everything else.
Well, despite all of the unexpected anomalies or whatever, adversities that have come your way, it's an encouraging start. And we only hope that, the book is more readily available to people across the globe and it does even better. But anyway, coming to the actual book now, ever since the day that I joined Good Areas, and it's been over 2 years, right? you have been working on this book tirelessly. And of course, Cheyenne has helped you a fair bit in the writing process. And you've interviewed like a billion people, right? And you've also often come to the Good Areas team with discussion points whenever you want to pick the team's brain and everything. So it's been quite the journey, hasn't it?
Yeah, I've never worked this long on a book before. Obviously, Death of a Gentleman was a 4-year project. This one's probably 2.5 to 3 years, as you say. I can't remember exactly when I got the deal on it, but yeah. So it's been a really, really long project from that point of view, and it's weird because most of my books have come out with pitch, and then like kind of a last minute kind of things. Quite often they have to be because they're at the end of a tour or something when I'm writing one of those books. The Hardy Grant book on the Test cricket, they only gave me about 7 or 8 months, I think, from beginning to end to give them the final draft. So this is very, very different, and it probably means at times I was staring at a blank wall trying to work out what to do, and at other times when you just get, I would send you a message, or different friends in different cricket countries talking about different players and trying to get my head around different players. Partly just because there's so much going on in my brain when it came to this book for a long period of time. Like, I think if you've been watching any of the Wagon Wheels, especially, the amount of times I've mentioned it, it's not because I was like pre-planning it. It's just like it was just in my mind all the time.
Yeah, no, I absolutely know what you're talking about. Of course, it was an honor just to be a part of the discussions. I know I didn't really contribute at all towards the book, but it feels pretty surreal that,
I don't even think you got a thank you in the book. I'm trying to think if you got a thank you. I don't think you did. I think you were completely stiff. I'd have to have a look. I don't think you're in the book.
I did give you valuable insight when you were confused between Moyo and Said Anwar, Jarrod. So
yeah, that was one.
You have stiffed me.
I'm just having a look here. Because there are some, obviously, Cheyenne, as you mentioned, Abhishek Mukherjee, Shubu, and Varun. Yeah, they all get shout outs. You absolutely stiffed there. But I mean, if I put in everyone I had a conversation with, it was usually the people. So, Tim Wigmore during the book, he was writing a book on Test cricket. So he was asking me questions that really helped, right? Usman Samiuddin, Neil Fairburn from MV Play, Patrick Newen from CricViz. I tried to put in the people who like really went above and beyond. But you and everyone else that I know, anyone who kind of had a brain and some knowledge on the topic was at one stage or another having to answer a question about a player or two.
I think literally on my first day, or whenever I was officially a part of the team, we were having conversations about this book. So that's how long the origin story goes. And speaking of origin stories, I saw your clip on Instagram in which you spoke about your teacher Alex Picachi. Really, really fun clip, guys. You should go check it out. He kind of inspired 13-year-old Jarrod to pick up writing, and it kind of stuck with him. And your love for writing and your love for cricket, Jarrod, is well documented, obviously. But why specifically the art of batting? Like, what was the stimulus that triggered you to take this project on in particular in the first place?
Yeah, I think it just came out of the idea that we hadn't done this very well. You're probably a little bit too young to have run into this, but you'll know what I'm talking about. Most of conversations in the 90s, it didn't matter where you're from. You were a Lara person or a Sachin person, right? Throw in a little bit of Steve Orr and then a little bit of Ricky Ponting at different times. But basically, that was the big argument, who was the better between these two players? And that's always been a part of cricket, right? Trumper versus Bradman was once a conversation. And yet, when I sort of thought about it, I was like, there really isn't many books trying to go through who just are the best players. So there's lots of books on the best batters, right? Or the best batsmen or the greatest batsman of all time. There's those kinds of books, but they're just a collection of really good players, right? And there's like I've got the Ted Dexter one. There's just some random players he's put in where you're just like, he just likes this player. Like it's not that there's no be like me putting Matthew Elliott in, right? It's just like, I really like this player. I'm going to put them in. And so I really, after listening to the Thinking Basketball podcast, and I think they did about 8 episodes on their top 50 basketballs of all time, I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to do a project where I can use the historical stuff that I know, the analytics that I have, my journalism skills, right? And my writing skills all together, because I'm not like other writers. I have, there might be other people who are purely better at analytics or analysis or journalism or writing, but I have the ability to go across all of them. right? And so I kind of felt like this was a book that would allow me to do that, right? To really go through everything. And at the start, as I said, it was more of an intellectual thing of, can we just come up with the 50 best test batters of all time? And then by the end, you kind of, there's only so many times you can look at clips of Zahir Abbas or Peter May or, Barry Richards and these guys, and just not fall in love with batting a little bit more. Do you know what I mean? Like after a while, it's just, Cheyenne, who didn't even know who some of these guys were, like, watching Peter May clips at 2 a.m. in Lucknow, right? Like sending me messages going, oh my God, have you seen what he does on this ball? Right. That's the level that we got into. And, sending each other clips and little bits and everything else. So it probably moved away from the intellectual thing. And then it became, well, what is great batting? Right? How does it exist? Why does it exist? What does it mean? Who are the best at each individual skill? All these sorts of things. It's kind of where it ended up. But it started as, oh, I think cricket needs this. And it ended as, I just want to write really cool things about batting.
I mean, obviously, we all know that you have ranked the top 50 test batters to have ever graced the sport in this book, right? Now, I know how cumbersome and exhausting that exercise was. And I also kind of know the science that goes behind it, how you came to a conclusion. But most of the people, or pretty much everyone who's watching this or listening to this, does not. So shed some light on the experience altogether and how you came to a conclusion.
Yeah, this is definitely the part of the book that I got too into early on. In fact, I would say I saved the writing too late, only because I was so worried about getting everything right, even though I know it's subjective and there is no right. Like I was so worried about it. So I think we started with test batters over, and I might be misremembering the exact numbers. Cheyenne will probably be better on this than I would be, but I think it was test batters with a batting average of over 44 with more than 2,000 or 3,000 runs. And that gave us, let's say, 65 to 70 players or whatever that original list was. We then realized that there weren't many openers in that list. And so we changed it to a 42 average if you were an opener for the majority of your career. And then later on, we brought in people who didn't pass one of those metrics, but we knew had a case regardless. So we made special cases for, Ranji and Trumper, I suppose, no, George Headley might have been on the original numbers. Maybe George Headley might have been another one. I can't remember. But all the guys who didn't quite make the original numbers that came in. And then what we did is we rated all these players against each other for home versus away. Well, away records generally was the more important one. We ranked them against each other when it came to match factor or when it came to era factor. We looked at how many good years they had, so averaging, over 40, and how many great years they had, so averaging over 50. And we just kept adding sort of layers to all these sorts of things. And then we did an individual case study on 80 players, 85 players. I should look at my list. I'm not sure how many I actually have on there. And some of those case studies, for someone like Simon Kadich, the minute we looked at Simon Kadich's numbers, it was quite clear that he's played in one of the greatest batting eras of all time, right? So it's like my notes on Simon Kadich are very good player, but obviously not. It shouldn't be mentioned in a list like this. Manas and Babar Azam. I don't think Baba might have been on the list when we started it, but Manas definitely was on the long list. And again, there's one note, which is he hasn't made a run since we put him on this list, right? Like sometimes it's very simple. And then you're going into things of trying to work out, did they make runs against the best teams? Did they make runs everywhere?
True.
Were they consistent? Were they peak players? Is their main argument longevity? Is their main argument that, I don't know, an Asian player has never done this or a Western player has never done this? And so in the end, there isn't like there's a metric. There is like a huge amount of metrics that went into it. And then one of the last things we added was strike rate. So we changed a few people around for strike rate. Once we got CricViz gave us some of the numbers on strike rate. And so that's what we did. We looked at numbers versus high pace. We looked at, that's more for the modern players. We looked at records versus pace versus spin, anywhere we could get data or information. And we just lost shitloads of videos. Like the players I didn't know very well were the ones that I wanted to watch more video on. So Peter May doesn't make the book, but we certainly watched a lot of Peter May, watched a lot of Ken Barrington, Dennis Compton was another player I looked at. Zahir Bass was someone that I knew a lot about, but hadn't probably seen as much of. So I wanted to go back and watch him. Roy Fredericks was another player that I wanted to go back and have a look at. And some of these players didn't make the book, right? But I needed to know as much as possible about them in order to understand the total nature of batting and everything else. And so, I might have spent more time watching Navjot Sidhu highlights than anyone needed to, because he's probably not even a top 100 test batter of all time. But from that, I learned other things that were helpful for me later on.
Yeah, I mean, of course, what would you say? There's a math term for this, which I'm completely blanking on. But you basically, whenever you set up an equation, you have these prerequisite sort of things for it, right? So you've explained that bit. But also, I know that you guys had like these quartiles for the players as far as ranking is concerned. So this player could be like 4th or 25th. So talk a bit about that.
Essentially, and this is something I took directly. This is what I was most interested in when listening to the Thinking Basketball podcast, which is, we've all seen these lists before, right? Like, it was a Bleacher Report or SB Nation, whichever one of those. Like, that was what they got famous on, was just people just ranking lists. And there's heaps of them of cricket too. You can find them in cricket as well. Cricket Web did one as well. And cricket, I really like Cricket Web's list. I don't agree with it, but I really, really like it. And there was a panel of about 15 or 16 of them, right? That I think that all put their votes in. But the problem is that let me come up with a player. Javed Miandad is 23rd, I think, on the list, right? That's such a arbitrary number, right? Like, he's 23rd. Yes, we've done a lot of research, and I'm pretty happy he's roughly around the 23rd best player. But the idea that even 5 minutes after I've written down he's the 23rd best player, that I'm going to agree with that, I'm not. So what we did is we looked at this thing from a range perspective. And so that is, could you make an argument that this player could go higher? And could you make an argument that this player could go lower? And so I think Ken Barrington's one where we have him right towards the back end of our range. We don't particularly rate Ken Barrington that highly, but we also know, I've seen other people list him as high as the 5th greatest batter of all time, right? And I think you can make a claim that he could be really high. What's Ken Barrington's batting average? Like 58 or 59 or something ridiculous, 57? So I understand that, right? Kumar Sangakkara is another player where you can make an argument that he should be much higher than he's probably ended up on our list. And then you've got the opposite too. There are players that we, I think of Victor Trumper's case, we have him right at the forefront of our rankings, whereas a lot of other people would have him at the other end. It depends on the case you're making, right? And so if you go to the sort of the top end players, especially, it's like, I'm trying to think of another good player, Len Hutton or Sunil Gavaskar. They probably both have very, very good claims to be the 4th greatest batter of all time. But you could also make a claim that maybe they're both the 8th or 9th best batter of all time, right? So where you fit them in...
I'm sorry. Parameters was the word. I was literally dying. Anyway.
He's like, I haven't listened to a word you've said. You've just been talking shit. I've been thinking of
I've listened to all the words you've said, but it was really bothering me.
Parameters. No, that makes sense. So that's the way that we wanted to do it. And there's kind of 3 rankings within. Like, you can if you're going to quibble with this about numbers, you actually should be quibbling about the fact that we kind of rank these players 3 times. So the first time is just the number that they get. The second one is the tier that they are in, right? Where generally, I think most of the tiers are probably 2 to 3 people, or 3 to 4 people, maybe 5 people. There's a couple of very small tiers. There's a couple of, slightly larger tiers. And that is just players that could kind of move. Like, if a player's 28th and the tier goes down to 23, you could argue that they're almost as good as the 23rd player, but there's probably a gap between the 23rd player and the 22nd player in our mind, is the way that we would put the tiers. And then, as you said, then we have the range. And the range is more about the fact of what argument you are making for that player on any particular day, right? Could you make an argument? And this comes back to a different Thinking Basketball podcast, which they did later, but I'd already started this. But they basically did, is there a way, they said, what are the players who have a genuine claim to be the greatest basketballer of all time? And when you think about it, it's actually like, you've got Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar straight away. So there's 3. If you throw Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell in there, you've got 4 and 5. And I can't remember, they might have had another couple that were on the fringe of that as well. You know, maybe, I don't know if Larry Bird or Magic Johnson were in that discussion as well, but there was one or two other players. And that's probably true, right? Like, depending on how you frame it and how you like it. And that's what I think Rangers really tells you, which is, I think you could say that Ken Barrington's record is a little bit soft in some ways, but when it comes down to it, he made so many runs in Test cricket over a long period of time with mental health concerns and everything else going on. I think you would find it hard to say he probably shouldn't be roughly in the range that we found him to be in, right? I think that's probably a fair assumption of his skill. And there are some players with really, really wide ranges, right? And there are some players with quite narrow ranges because it's like, no, this is pretty much where we think they should be.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is really important for viewers and listeners to understand, because without this perspective, you are removing the subjectivity out of it, because after a certain point, it all comes down to what you value in a batter, right? And then based on that, you would have them at a certain number within a certain range. So that's kind of how Jarrod and whoever helped him conducted this exercise.
I think if you look at the first 37 players on the list, I think it's 37 or 38, it's wherever Inzamam fits in. If you look at those players, I don't think there is a genuine argument that none of them should be in the top 50 best batters of all time, right? I could be wrong, but I don't think there's a genuine argument that any of them can't be in there, right? From there, you've got all these ranges. So you could take the top 37, 38 players, right? And completely play with my ranges, right? And move my ranges around, and you would come up with a different list of basically the same 37 people. I think is probably pretty fair.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, let us take a short break. You guys are watching Footmarks with Jarrod and Behram. We're talking about his book, The Art of Batting, and we will be back after like a 30 to 40 second break.
Brian Lara used pot plants to work on his placement. John Wright glued his glove to his bat. Sachin Tendulkar dug up practice pitches. Tatenda Taibu cut the top off his bat. Claire Taylor used a hockey grip. Steve Smith was from tennis. Dean Jones would call phantom runs. And Victor Trumper turned the nets into a war zone to survive. The best batters in the world do whatever they have to make runs. We have told their stories in our new book, The Art of Batting.
Welcome back to the Footmarks podcast. You guys are with Behram and Jarrod. And Jarrod, you were just mentioning about how, you can play around with the ranges and different batters could fit in different places. Well, I want to ask you, what was the toughest decision that you had to make when it came to finalizing the list of 50?
Oh, the toughest decision is obviously the last five, right? Like, I think Mohammed Yusuf went in and out of the book about 23 times. Like, and there's so many players who kind of, I felt like just it's unfair to not have them as the 50 greatest batter of all time, but I also felt unfair on Moyo. So it was a really weird one to have him in or not have him in. But realistically, the toughest decision, I think, is Virat and maybe Joe Root, just because they were still playing, right?
True.
So, Root goes on this run, and I'm like, oh shit, we've got him too low. And like, you remember, there was that point where, is he the greatest England batter of all time? And I'm like, no, I know he's not. But at the same time, I've also got him too low. Like, I'm going to have to move him up. And with Virat, I've said this so many times, but when I started the book, I was like, everyone's going to hate how low I have Virat. Like, I might even tank the book because, Virat fans are going to go nuts and whatever. By the time I started, the book was being written. It was like, people were contacting me saying, I hope Virat's not going to be on your list. He's no longer in the 50 greatest test batters of all time. You're just like, oh my God. So I think they were quite tough. And you'd throw Kane Williamson in there as well, and Smith, just because they're all current players, right? And
true.
If something dramatic happened to any of them, and it kind of did to Virat and to Root and Smith to a lesser perspective, it's like, how much do I factor in that? Because I didn't want to factor in form, because form has nothing to do with how good these players are, right? But it's hard not to have that. So those were definitely the toughest ones. The bottom five, I'm trying to think of who all the players were, but Moyo, Neil Harvey, who else is in that area? Walcott, Weeks, and then maybe there's one other. Just, you've got on the other side, you've got Gowra and Gooch and Ponsford and Syed Anwar, as you said before, and Adam Gilchrist.
True.
Right? Like all these other players, and you're like, oh. And on a day-by-day basis, and this is why the range is so important, right? Because I'm like, I know that some of these players could go lower, but where do I feel on them? And I think if I did the list, I know now, probably by the time I start to do the videos, I think I will change some of that bottom 50 a little bit, not massively, but I do think I'll change it a little bit. And also, what we'll probably do when we do the proper video series on it is we will actually do the do maybe the top 60 or 70 to show everyone who's sort of on the long list. The other players, I
think we're going to be doing a quick picks very soon on the players who missed out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I think so that's definitely another side of it. But then I think the players like George Headley doesn't play many tests. Graham Pollock doesn't play many tests. Both the VJs kind of miss out, and I kind of feel that that's unfair as well. Barry Richards misses out. So in some cases, you're trying to work out how good someone is without a lot of historical data to go, because I didn't play a lot of test matches. And, those are the players that were a little bit trickier. I mean, with someone like WG Grace, I think it's fine because we have so much of his record and he still dominated for a generation. But like Victor Trumpet was incredible, but he wasn't that much better than Clem Hill. So should Clem Hill be in as well? And that's the main issue. But yeah, I would say that there's no doubt that Virat was the one. I knew the two players, and I should have known the three players. I knew the two players I get the most feedback about. I knew it'd be Virat and Steve Waugh. Right, that was pretty sure on those two. The one I had forgotten was Graham Gooch, and my first 5 interviews were about the fact Graham Gooch is not on this list. And I should have picked that up as well, and I didn't. And Graham Gooch almost made it. I mean, he's not far away at all. Steve Waugh is a little bit lower in the list than 90s kids like.
Yeah, sure. But just on that note, if I were to present you with a hypothetical situation that Bloomsbury has called you and they've said, Jarrod, for some weird reason, now we want you to do the 51 best test batters of all time. So who would be number 51? Who is the best batter to miss out on your list? I know I'm putting you on the spot over there and there's no easy answer, but I mean, it's fun.
Yeah, during the list, I kind of thought that Gilchrist was the unofficial 51, and I explained why he's not in the list in the book, but I kind of had him there. I'm wondering now if it's not Gooch that is the player that I probably should have put in the list, and maybe I wonder if, as I said, in 6 months' time, I might have to actually, for the players from 45 to 60, I might actually have to directly compare them to each other, which is not how we did the book, right? I might have to do that just to see exactly what I feel about those kinds of players. So I think Gooch is certainly someone for me that I feel. So that Gooch has the most professional runs in cricket.
Yes, you recently told me that there was a fun fact with Graham Hick over there, wasn't there?
Yeah, Graham Hick has the second most professional runs in cricket, and also the second most for a man named Graham, which I think it's in my latest cricketer piece. It's one of my favorite lines I've ever come across.
What this is like? This is like that moment when we were doing the Bosanquet Footmarks, and you were like, he's not even the most popular Bernard Bosanquet.
Yeah, exactly.
He's the second most famous Bernard Bosanquet.
So, the other player I would probably throw in there is Bill Ponsford as well, who, again, it's tricky. He ends up averaging 48 in Test cricket with only 2,000 runs in 29 games, but he averages away from home 62. So his average is actually, he's in Australia where he tanks it. I don't think Ponsford quite makes it, although I think he was obviously an unquestionable great. But those are the kinds of players that I think are very, very unlucky to miss out on. And also, I'll probably throw up there two that I've talked about a lot since writing the book, which is VVS Laxman and Hanif Mohammed. Because if you rate individual innings very high, surely they then have to come back to the top of the list, right? Like, I think you can say that overall, their careers are probably, just out of this list. But on talent, I don't think you would say that either of them deserve to be out of it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair. And Jarrod, I mean, of course, you're not only ranking the best 50 test batters in this book, right? There's a whole lot more to it. So please shed some light on that as well.
Yeah. The actual list and the chapter is, I don't know, maybe 20 pages, right? It's not a big part of what is a 300-page book. This is not a book. We thought about taking the list out, right? Only because at the end of the day, I didn't really write a book that needed a list, right? And so, we had a brief conversation with Bloomsbury and they were like, but you've spent so much time working on it. And it actually, everything you've written in the book leads into the list. So let's keep the list in, even if we understand what you're saying. And I think it ended up in...
It has a BuzzFeed-ish sort of pull. I don't mean to disrespect your book, but it does have that pull. I want to know who the best 50 batters are,
Yes, and that's what we sold it on, right? And that was, me and when I went into with Matt at Bloomsbury, we sold it to the rest of Bloomsbury on the list. But then I'd written such a different kind of book. It was like we just had to stop and think about it, right? The book is probably better with the list in it than without it, right? And I don't mean that just because it brings everything together towards the back end of this production. So the 255 pages of the book are really about what test batting is. There is, let me just open it up so I can remember. But the introduction chapter is really about W.G. Grace and the birth of batting a little bit and everything else. That leads into the evolution of batting, right? And then we've got some science stuff about eyes. We then have facing fast bowling. We have something about ODI cricket and women's cricket because they haven't played as many test matches. Technique, spin, running between the wickets, batters who attack, peak players. It just keeps motivation, evil geniuses, right? Like kind of all the way through. That's kind of where it is going in the book. And so the list is like the 15th chapter, I think. I think there's 16 chapters in the book. And so by the time you get there, I don't care if people go, I don't need the list now. He told me about batting. I know different things that I knew before. There are stories in here. There are hopefully, I've recreated great moments for people to feel incredible. I have investigated what it means to be a great batter from great batters themselves, but also from players who weren't great batters, but lived with great batters. You've got Jimmy Adams talking about Sachin and Lara. He's actually just as interesting on Inzi and other players as well, right? You've got Chris Rogers talking about Warner and Smith, right? And Root. Rogers loves Root as well. So you've got players who are not quite greats, who have the ability to do that. And Ross Taylor talking about, Virender Sehwag, and Rahul Dravid talking about Ricky Ponting. Like it's incredible to allow them to talk about their heroes. So like one thing I asked in the book, and it didn't end up making it a huge part of it, but it was something I was interested in when interviewing everyone was, who's the batter you wish you could be, right? And in some cases, it was like, with Rahul Dravid, I just think it was obviously Ponting. But Kumar Sangakkara, he picks Lara, right? And a few different players picked, different. I think Bumble picked Sobers, right? Like that tells you a lot as well about the magnitude of the force of nature of these different kinds of batters and everything else. So that was definitely something else that was for me that was really important. This I kind of see the entire book as a love letter to batting, right? Yeah. And specifically test batting, but there's a lot of stuff in, there are little examples that I use from T20 games and ODI stuff as well, but it's mostly about test batting and how that works. And so I was thinking about it from a point of view of, I wanted it to work for hardcore people like us, right? But I also wanted it to be for someone who maybe just loved batting when they were a kid and didn't bat anymore. And like, their nephew or their grandson or their next door neighbor is buying them a present. And they're like, oh, he used to bat. Like I wanted it to be open and accessible to anyone who'd kind of ever picked up a bat or watched anyone bat. Do you know what I mean? I didn't just want it to be, hardcore. Like it could have been all numbers and it could have been all lists and whatever. I wanted it to feel like at times you were kind of, playing an innings yourself.
You obviously spoke to a lot of great batters, and I mean, not so great batters as well, some all-time goods. And I mean,
you love that phrase, don't you? All-time goods.
Yeah,
it's one of your favorites.
Really like it's Varun coined the phrase all-time good. But yeah, I mean, after having so many conversations with so many people and all those interviews, which interview really stuck out for you? Like, which was the one?
I don't know if there's one, because I was really lucky, right?
Yeah.
I didn't think Rahul would be able to do it because I knew how busy he was coming into the World Cup. And when I thought I got him, I thought he'll do it for about half an hour, 40 minutes, and he'll be like, Jarrod, I've got to go, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I haven't even checked, but I think the full recording's like 2.5 hours, right? Like it was
Yeah.
because me and Raoul do get on very well, but also, and I've said this before, if you ever want to interview someone about the thing they love. Don't interview them about the thing they're famous for. Don't interview them about the thing that everyone asks them. I wasn't saying to Raoul, tell me about yourself, how great you were, whatever. I was literally like, let's talk about batting for as long as possible. So that to be able to, and me and Raoul have known each other a long time. I don't think we've ever just sat down and done that. We've nerded out about little bits, but we've never had the chance one-on-one to just be like, what about this? What about this? And I would throw something at him and he would throw something back at me. And it made the book so much better. Jimmy Adams was another one who I've only met Jimmy once, right? But he reached out at one stage and said he wanted to catch up and talk to me about something. And we had a coffee and it was like an hour and a half, one of the best chats in cricket. And so then I was like, I want to talk to him for the book. And I think when you say to someone, I want to talk about the 50 greatest batters of all time or the greatest batters or whatever I said, I think in Jimmy's mind, it's like, well, he's going to ask about Lara and he's going to ask about Sachin. Whereas I was asking about Hick and Ramprakash and Bevan and Inzi and Flower. And he stops halfway through, Jimmy, and he's like, I want to read this book. And like, you can't get anything nicer than someone saying that, right? Like, and he wasn't the only one. Susie Bates said something similar. When the sort of questions I asked Susie, she was like, I think I really want to read this book. Can you make sure I get a copy? And I was like, of course you can. Then she was completely freaked out when I turned up at Beckenham with a copy, by the way. So that's those sorts of conversations were incredible for me as someone who's worked in this industry to be able to get something out of people like that who probably talk about cricket all the time, but they don't get to talk about this sort of stuff, right? And they get to break it down. So those were the three incredible ones. But I was really lucky to go back and get two very old cricketers, one of which sadly died while I was writing the book, Bob Knocker-White, who I probably talked about a lot, but absolute hero and a legend and was brilliant and, batted with Sobers and, batted with great. He batted with and against all the best players in English cricket and county cricket for a long period of time. And there's another guy called Brian Stott, who I was desperate to get someone who batted with Hutton, right? And because I rate Hutton really highly, but the history of cricket has kind of forgotten Hutton, right? Barrington still gets talked about a little bit, and you've got Herbert Sutcliffe. So there's so many great English batters. But Hutton just felt like to me he was under the radar, and yet his record, Behram, is almost perfect. Like it's ridiculous at how brilliant he was. And so I talked to Brian about a lot of the old great batters, right? Because he played, I think Brian must have started in the late 40s, early 50s, and goes over a period of time. And he talks brilliantly about a lot of the old players and explaining, he's like, so Sobers did this, and this guy did this, and Barrington was like this, and Compton did this. But he batted with Hutton, and Hutton tried to coach him and make him better and everything. And it was like, it felt like going back and touching history, right? Yeah. There's lots of people who talk about playing with Sobers and whatever. I could have found bunches of people who played with Sobers, watched Sobers, whatever. Hutton felt like 100 years before that. Like that there was something missing there. And to be able to find maybe one of the last survivors who batted a lot of their career with him, was a magical moment. And I don't even know. I'm trying to remember how old he would be. He's like a really, really Brian Stott age. He must be, he's 90, right? Okay. And like when you're interviewing someone who's that old, he was still quite alert, don't get me wrong, but when you're interviewing someone that old, it's like trying to keep them on topic, trying to keep them in the right area. But it didn't matter with him because every story was like, well, when I saw Barrington, like, okay, that's a great aside. Let's go with this. So no, it was absolutely great. I don't think there was a single bad interview. I think the Lara and the De Villiers ones were tougher because they didn't give me a lot of time, but also I feel like they're not great at communicating their side of it, if that makes sense. So Lara gave me great stories and De Villiers gave me great stories, but they weren't as good at actually going through the nuts and bolts. So sometimes it was better to get someone like Ross Taylor to talk about AB De Villiers than it was for AB De Villiers to talk about him.
Right. No. I mean, a little while ago, you explained or kind of theorized what a potential point of view of a reader would be when they read the book, of course, all that journey. And now you've told us, how critical or crucial these interviews were for you
Yep.
whilst writing and researching this book. But my question to you is, when you were conducting these interviews and when you were researching and writing along the way, how has this book overall changed or altered your personal perspective on batsmanship as a craft?
Yeah, one of the big things for me is I've been coming to this realization for a long time, but I think what we call natural batting, so let's say AB de Villiers, is what we're actually saying is that person has slightly more time than someone else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And natural batting, I would say that Alistair Cook is a naturally patient person. Like I've seen him in the bar, like he would sit there for a long time. Do you know what I mean? He just looks like a naturally patient person to me. And we don't see that as a natural batting skill, right? Whereas in actual fact, David Warner's personality and Alistair Cook's personality are part of the reasons that they are both fantastic players, right? Like they're very different personalities and it comes out. And so I think what I started to realize during the book is that technique, and I've always been a bit wishy with technique. As long as you have a repeatable technique, I don't care if it's Shivnarine Chanderpaul, Steve Smith, or Mitali Raj, right? I just don't care. As long as it's repeatable and you can prove that it is repeatable, right? Then I will trust your technique. But there's all these other little things like motivation, boredom, patience, aggression, calculated risks, and all these things. And you think about Kevin Peterson, right? Kevin Peterson is a person who will just take a risk at any time to try and get a better result for himself, right?
Yeah.
That isn't something that I can train my kids to do. They're either going to be able to do that or not, right? And so I think beforehand, I would have been like, okay, so the eye is the thing that you can't teach, but everything else you can probably teach, right? And now I think about it from a completely different point of view. And you know, obviously Eek's playing cricket at the moment. Zachariah's just stopped, although he might want to start up again shortly. But you know, with Eek, it's like I'm much more conscious now of the kind of batter I think he should be, right? And he naturally gravitates towards. Whereas before, I was much more conscious of trying to make him into a batter that I thought was the correct kind of batter, right? And so now I understand how much of this, and a lot of this comes from, you know, Rahul Dravid, you know, sort of saying, you know, how many great batters have had sons who are great batters, right? Like, so in my mind, it was, there are all these soft skills we talked about before, like taking risks, like attacking, like patience, like overcoming boredom. I thought anyone could overcome them. And that's the way we talk about it. Oh, if this guy just had a little bit more patience. And it's like, yeah, he's probably not. He's probably going to mature. He's probably going to make better decisions as he gets older. But if he doesn't have patience at, you know, 22, 23, 24, he's probably not going to be Alistair Cook at 30, right? Unless he completely changes who he is as a human being, right?
True.
And so the fact that great batters, the fact that Sachin Tendulkar could not teach his son to be a professional batter with all the resources and all the best coaches in the world, I think tells you something about this being more inherent and natural than we give it credit for, right? And there's you know, we know now that maybe one day, Behram, we will be able to teach people to learn how to saccade with their eyes like the top players do so that they can basically face 90 miles an hour. Maybe there'll be a way of teaching humans how to do that, right? And that would mean that there'll be an influx of talented batters everywhere in the world. But at the moment, you're basically narrowing it down to the top people at Test cricket are the people who can do that magical trick with their eyes, right? And then have 2 or 3 elite or really good skills, or maybe 7 or 8, you know, good skills that allow them to be that player. And I think I completely think differently about what a great player is now, a great batter is now than I did at the start on the basis of all that.
I suppose what it all comes down to is that each individual batter's personal traits, you know, what makes them them, kind of is reflected within their batting as well. And I think that's what you're kind of getting onto over here. And the only way this changes is when we'll have bionic human beings, and then the sport will be completely different, right? But anyway, just to kind of finish up, Jarrod, why don't you give people 3 solid reasons why they should buy a book?
I just think if you love batting, or you know someone who loves batting, I don't think you'll get a more carefully put together ode to batting than this, right? You know, we really did try and flip up as many rocks as possible to make this, you know, the perfect book for batting. I think it's also very important that in a world where the vast majority of books are ghost-written books by people who don't really care all that much about the, you know, about the topic, that when you see my book or you see Tim Wigmore's book, right, or Annie Chave, I think, has a book out at the moment, which actually has something to say, where the authors have gone above and beyond to try and tell, you know, these specific stories. You have to support those kinds of authors. Like, it's really easy to pick up the next Stuart Broad or Jimmy Anderson or Sachin Tendulkar book, right? And I'm not saying you don't find out great things from that, but if you're only buying those kinds of books, you're actually limiting the amount of great writing that can happen. And so supporting a book like this, I think, is really important. And lastly, like, for so many people, supporting us on Patreon, doing super chats, all those things are just beyond them financially, like on a normal level. And you don't get much back for that. I guess you might get your question answered on those things, but you don't get anything physical back. There aren't many times that we could say, if you support us, you will get this thing, right? And you will be able to hold it. And this is, for me, this is very much a Good Areas book. It's me and Cheyenne. So, you know, Cheyenne is the lead researcher on this book. Abhishek, who was involved in the Double Century project, so another guy from Good Areas. Behram's already talked about how I bored him to death with stuff over the time and trying to get to him. Varun, you know, helped us out at times with numbers. You know, Shubhu, we were talking to about, you know, designs and all sorts. They didn't end up going in the book, not because his designs weren't very good, but just because it wasn't the right book to put them in the end. It's very much a Good Areas book. And you know, it's, again, if you love our network and what we do, the ability to be able to support us and everything else. But forget about us, forget about supporting writers. If you love batting, I just don't think you can, you know, if you could afford this, if you love batting and you can afford this book, you should buy this book. Like, I went through some great old books about batting. There's nothing that has ever existed like this before. And hopefully it inspires a whole new generation of people to write books like this about the great game.
Yeah, I mean, amen to that. And I'll give you guys a fourth reason. You'd want to know that list of 50 batters, right? That's what it all comes down to.
Hasn't it?
Has it? Anyway, I mean, you want it in like hard copy right in front of you to really believe it and not trust the internet in today's day and age where AI is fabricating everything, right? Anyway, just some other closing questions I had for you. You've written, 6 to 7 books now. Has this been your most enjoyable project?
Oh, enjoyable is an interesting term. I wrote a book called, like a short book that's available on Kindle called The Lily of Camberfield, about myself and my dad. That was probably the most important thing I've written in book terms. This, I wish I'd been able to do what I did for this book for the Test cricket book. And weirdly enough, Wigmore is kind of doing that himself, because he's now got so me and Wigmore now have dueling books on Test cricket available out there.
Buy both of them.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think I probably enjoyed writing this more than I did the Test cricket one, even though I loved the Test cricket book. And Death of a Gentleman, I'm not sure I would say I enjoyed making Death of a Gentleman. It was 4 years of slog. So yeah, probably this is the one. The Kerry Packer documentary that still hasn't been released yet is another thing that I really, really enjoyed. And I was lucky. I think I finished Art of Batting and then almost straight away started the documentary on Kerry Packer. So they went back to back.
I was in England. I was living with you when you got that gig. I remember that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
so it had definitely gone about that. I mean, I would say that the whole Good Areas network is probably the most enjoyable thing I've ever done. You know, being able to hire people who I think are really talented, and you know, create this whole world that we're trying to create, partnering up with really cool people, making kind of what I want without an editor there, you know, taking chances and making risks, coming up with new show ideas. So yeah, so I think Art of Batting, the Kerry Packer documentary, and this are probably the 3 things that I've enjoyed doing the most. What I loved about the Art of Batting was the writing. So I didn't love as much the research and getting into the list and getting in my own head. Once I got out of that and I started writing it, it was a dream. It really was an absolute dream. And I would say the same for the Kerry Packer one as well. Once I'd done the research on the Kerry Packer and it was just me, writing stuff, it was just like, this is great. I feel like that again. And it's one reason why I want to write books. Like, I am a writer before anything else. I know I speak 83 hours a day on podcasts, but I am actually a writer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that reading the book will also feel like a dream. But anyway, can we expect The Art of Bowling anytime soon?
I haven't talked to Bloomsbury since it started. I know they're very excited at the fact that it's so high up all the charts. It's listed as a bestseller on India and the UK. I don't think it's done as well in Australia at the moment. It only really needs to do well in India or the UK. Do you know what I mean? So the fact that at the moment it's doing above expected in both is pretty big. I would assume that if we sell, and I don't know what the number is, but if we more than cover their costs, they are just going to do the bowling. But what this has really done is also, it's inspired me to write, to do a few different projects. So I'm actually at the moment in the middle of pitching some other projects as well that I really want to write, because the one thing that Good Areas hasn't always allowed me to do, although it does on occasion, is just get into a subject for 6 months and then come out the other side. Like, we've actually written really long video essays, but the problem is that, like, just making them and putting them on YouTube is not always the easiest thing in the world. We had a Joss Butler one that still never exists, right? Because it literally crashed 2 laptops, and we eventually just had to be like, maybe we have to do this in a different way. So I really do want to do that, but I would love to do The Art of Bowling. My biggest fear for a long time was, how do I do it? And then one day, you know what I'm like, I got in front of my whiteboard and I was like, I can work this out. And I just went through it. And by the end of it, I was like, yep, I know what this book is now. All I need to do is sell enough copies of the batting one and off we go.
Well, fingers crossed. We really hope that happens. And everyone, go and buy your copies of The Art of Batting. And support the Good Areas channel as well. Just a quick reminder, you can go to goodareas.co and you can bookmark that webpage, and that can prove to be your one-stop shop for all the fun work that we do as part of this team, whether it be written content, videos, or podcasts. But that is all for this episode of the Footmarks podcast, and we'll see you soon enough on another show. But have a good one, and till then, goodbye.
Ross Taylor couldn't see at night or when the clouds were in. Eventually, he had to see an eye specialist who would fix his eyesight. In the 2 years before the change, he still averaged more than 50 in international cricket. The top level of batting talent can basically see in the dark. That is who we are talking about in our new book, The Art of Batting. Head over and order your copy today.